Your father gave us our lives, and we buried him in silence.
Why are 10 white men kneeling at the grave of my black father? Lyra Daniels stopped still at the edge of the graveyard, her breath stuck halfway in her chest. That was all she could think about. 10 men with polished shoes and fancy outfits knelt in complete stillness. No words, no prayers. They were just standing there with their heads down and hands joined, too strange for words. Then one of them turned around. James Rowland was it. The rich man. The media tycoon. The face of every business magazine cover for the past 10 years. The man who didn't even need to know her name, let alone visit the grave of a truck driver from Alabama. But there he was, with tears in his eyes. What kind of story starts out like this? A story about black people, one buried for a long time, one that the world never wanted to tell. And that's why you're here. This isn't just another video. This is hidden worth. What you're about to hear isn't only about race, power, or money. It's about the kind of excellence that people don't often notice. A young waitress thought no one could see her, till things changed. Last week, guests at a restaurant called Lyra Sweetheart instead of her name while she was refilling coffee. They spoke over her, gave pennies as tips. He acted like her smile was part of the furniture. She couldn't be seen. 10 of the most powerful men in America were bowing for a man she called Dad. He was a man who died without saying anything about what he did. A guy the world wanted to forget, but one moment brought the truth back to light. Please stay with me. What you're about to learn might impact how you think about honor, legacy, and what it actually means to owe someone money. This is hidden worth, and this is a black narrative that will stay with you. The evening news never covered Elijah Daniels. There were no headlines, prizes, or trophies with his name on them. Just another guy working hard, driving 18-wheelers in the hot southern weather, and moving other people's money from one coast to the other. He was invisible to the world, a black man behind the wheel, living paycheck to paycheck, and keeping his head down in a country that didn't often glance his way. But to Lyra, he was everything. He taught her how to tie her shoes, look people in the eye, and never say sorry for being who she was. He possessed a chuckle that could fill a room and a voice that started soft and ended strong, like church music turned into words. He would encourage her, "You don't need the world to notice you, baby. You only need to pay attention to yourself." But the world made sure she learnt the hard way what he meant. A teacher asked Lyra when she was 8 if her father was one of those men who left. At first, she didn't get it. She could feel her cheeks getting red as the kids giggled. Years later, she understood that many considered her as a mistake or a charity case. Elijah didn't say anything about pain. He just kept going. He ate in his cab because white truckers wouldn't share a table with him at diners. Even though store owners watched him like a robber, he still said thank you and paid full price. He smiled, kept his hands in view, and spoke calmly as cops pulled him over for routine checks. "Yes, sir. No, sir. Just on my way home." Lyra remembered the night he got home later than normal. His clothes were ripped and his hands were scratched. He didn't say anything about what occurred. He only hugged her longer than usual and muttered, "You're my reason. Remember that." That was the last week she saw him alive. The official report indicated it was a single-vehicle accident. The road was slick from the rain and visibility was poor. The case is closed. But Lyra knew the things didn't add up, even at 15. He had been careful, all the time. The brakes on the truck were brand new. He knows the way. Then that night, her aunt got a phone call from a man declaring that Elijah Daniels was a hero. Then they hung up without mentioning why. Now, years later, she stood by that grave and watched 10 men in tailored suits bow before her father's name. The years of stillness were heavy, like damp earth. It could be that her father was more than simply a man who worked hard and died quietly. Maybe the tale she heard wasn't true at all. And for the first time, Lyra felt something stronger than sadness. She had a reason to live. Lyra Daniels had mastered the skill of being invisible by the time she was 23. She worked the morning shift at a fancy brunch place in the downtown area. The design was simple. The avocado toast cost $20, and the customers didn't even look at her. Every day, she wore her name tag in a neat, centered way. But most of her customers called her sweetheart, honey, or even you. What about her smile? Perfect. What about her hair, tied back tightly and neatly? What is her uniform? Always in a hurry. But none of it mattered. She wasn't like the girls they saw on Instagram stories or on magazine covers. She was the one who brought them food and refilled their coffee, always a step behind and a little quieter. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But that bothered her. Some days she would walk home with sore toes and raw hands from the sanitizer and wonder if this was all her life would ever be. Serving folks who never looked up, saying, "Of course, sir," to males who snapped their fingers and brandished their cards like they were giving orders, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, but were just mean in disguise. She would hear whispers from time to time about how she was just employed to meet a diversity goal, or how someone, like her, should be happy to have a job like this. She didn't answer. Just put the sting inside, where the other bruises were. Then there were the suggestions. The small quantities of money that are judged. The pair that stayed for an hour and a half and then left 3/4. The man who begged for more napkins, syrup, and smiles, yet left nothing but crumbs. And the lady who gave Lyra a Bible instead of a tip said, "God bless you, sweetheart. Your face is really lovely. Don't waste it here." Lyra wanted to yell, but she didn't. She grinned. She cleaned the tables. She punched out and walked home past shiny windows full of stuff she couldn't afford. That night, she sat at her modest kitchen table and looked at her father's old watch. She wore it anyway, even though it didn't tick anymore. He had told her before that not being seen didn't imply she wasn't worth it. But the truth was that she felt like no one remembered her. Up until that morning, when the man in the white suit came in, the one who didn't glance at her, he stared at her, and things began to shift. He walked in on a Tuesday morning. That day, the brunch crowd was quiet. There were only a few regulars and a few tourists taking pictures of their meals. Lyra had just dropped off a coffee when she saw him at table 6, which was the booth near the window in the corner. You couldn't miss him. Not simply because of the white suit, which was so well pressed that it looked like it had never been wrinkled, but also because he was so still. Be calm. He seemed like he was waiting for something more than eggs and toast. No phone. There is no menu. He had his hands folded on the table and his pale gray eyes were deep set and observing the room like it held a secret. Lyra came up with a pen and pad in hand and spoke in a professional way. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you a drink to start?" He looked up at her then, looked really hard, not the quick look most customers gave before going back to their phones. He looked at her for a long time, not in a weird way, not like the stares she was used to avoiding. This one was not the same, measured, on purpose. He stopped for a moment, which was long enough to feel weird, until he finally said, "Water. No ice." She nodded and walked away, her heart racing more than it should have. The water was already beating on the glass when she got back. She put it down, thinking that the normal sequence would come next, but instead, he moved something across the table, a napkin that has been folded. She picked it up and opened it cautiously, even though she was confused. There were only 6 words inside, written in crisp black ink. "Are you the daughter of Elijah Daniels?" She couldn't breathe. No one here knew that name, not the clients, not the workers. She seldom ever stated it out loud. He was already standing and reaching for his coat when she looked back at him. He put a $100 bill under the glass and gave her a brief, polite nod before leaving without saying anything further. Lyra remained there, holding a napkin, with questions stacking up quicker than she could think of them. Who was this guy? How did he know her dad? And why now, years after Elijah's death, was someone inquiring about him? She saw him get into a black SUV with tinted windows outside the window. After that, he was gone. But the question he left behind was only the start. 2 days went by. No one knew about the man in the white suit that Lyra had recounted. Not her co-workers, not her aunt who called every Sunday, and not even her. She kept the napkin folded up in her apron pocket and read those 6 words over and over again during breaks, hoping they would change and give her answers. They didn't. Then Friday came. When she returned home after working 2 shifts, her mailbox was slightly open. She lived in a rundown building with rusty hinges and neighbors who barely said hello, so it wasn't strange. But when she reached in, her fingers brushed upon something little. It's cold. Made of metal. It wasn't a letter. It was a box. It was little and square, wrapped in plain brown paper with her name, Lyra Daniels, printed clearly across the top. There is no return address. She cautiously brought it inside and locked the door behind her. She carefully opened the package while sitting at the kitchen table, the exact place where her father used to read her bedtime stories from an old book. There were 2 objects within. First, a ring. It was antique and silver, with scratches on the ring that made it look like it had been around longer than she had. But there were 3 words carved inside the band that made her chest tighten. Elijah L. Daniels, the name of her father. In his own writing, she saw how he created his ease. They leaned back a little, like he did, and they were peaceful and casual. The second thing was a folded-up piece of newspaper, changed color over time. It came from a small-town newspaper in Mississippi from over 20 years ago. The headline said, "Local man dies in brave rescue on I-59. Her hands shook. She had to read the piece 3 times before she could breathe again. It told the story of a tanker truck, a multi-car pileup, and a black man who grabbed a number of kids out of a flaming van just before the last explosion. No picture, no interviews. There was only one name mentioned. Elijah Daniels, 37, died at the scene. That was the truth she had never known. It wasn't just a random accident that killed her father. He had saved people. He had died a brave man. But why hadn't anyone told her? Why wasn't there a proper ceremony, or someone knocking on her door? She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ring in her hand. The weight of it brought back memories and questions. Someone had concealed this from her, and someone else was trying to get it back. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. The ring sat on her nightstand like a question she was too terrified to ask. The newspaper piece stayed in her journal, pushed flat under old grocery receipts and to-do lists. But it was always on her mind. That headline and those 3 words about her dad weren't enough. Not anymore. She had made up her mind by dawn. She would find out who her father truly was if no one else would tell her. She informed her boss that her grandma was unwell, which wasn't completely untrue, and she didn't work that weekend. Her heart was broken, tired of not knowing, tired of putting up with silence. The library was her first stop. Not the fancy downtown one with iPads and frigid lights, but the smaller one a few miles away, the kind with dusty shelves and librarians who remembered how paper smelled. She spent hours looking through microfilm for any indication of the I-59 crash. Most of the results were just copies of the same 2 paragraphs that had been printed in local media with just minor changes. But one thing stood out. A list of the 9 children and 1 adult who lived. Some versions wiped out the adult's name, while others called them unidentified. That wasn't a mistake. It was planned. Someone had decided not to follow up. Someone wanted that story to go away. She began to search for the kids. It took a long time. She looked through online forums, using her father's final shipping routes, and even joined a Facebook group for people who had been in highway accidents. Finally, a lead. Carla Jacobs, a woman, wrote about being in a van accident when she was a child. Mississippi, late 1,990 seconds. She wrote about a man she never got to thank. Lyra sent her a message. Carla answered in less than an hour. The message said, "Yes. I remember the guy. He took my little brother out. He was hurt, but he kept going back. I believe he saved us all. There was no question. It was him." As she typed, Lyra's heart raced. "Do you remember anyone else from that day? Is there anyone important? Is anyone watching?" The bubble for typing blinked. Carla then answered. "There was a guy in a white coat. I only recall because he had a strange silver watch that shone in the sun." He shook as he stood by the wreck. He was in tears. Lyra sat back in her seat. That suit, that clock. The guy from the restaurant didn't only know her dad. He had been there. Lyra went back to work the next Monday with more fire in her chest than fear. Something had changed in her. She wasn't going to the restaurant only to stay alive for the first time in years. She was carrying on a legacy, her dad's, but not everyone saw the shift, or embraced it. A group of loud, entitled businessmen was sitting at table 3 that morning. They joked about politics, spoke about how things used to be better, and hardly looked at Lyra when she served them. When she served them their coffee, one of them snapped his fingers, smiled, and said, "Extra cream, sweetheart. And smile a little bit. You look better when you smile." She didn't move. She just nodded and went away, holding the tray tightly so her hands wouldn't shake. Then a young black man in a suit and tie came in. He looked a little out of place among the others eating brunch. He silently sat by the window and waited for his turn. The guys at table 3 saw him too. "Wrong address, brother," one of them said so everyone could hear. Everyone else laughed. "Must have gone the wrong way on Wall Street." Lyra stopped moving. Her back was turned, and her heart was racing. She waited for someone to say something. No one in charge stepped in. No consumer said no. So she did. She strolled up to the table and put down their check, calm but strong. Men, your behavior is not right. You are welcome to move your business somewhere if you can't treat all of your guests with respect. The laughs ceased. One of the men looked up, and his face turned red. Excuse me? You heard me, she continued, her voice firm. This isn't your private club, it's a restaurant. They didn't leave a tip, and she did too later that afternoon. The manager called her into the rear with her arms folded. She said she was making a scene that made the place uncomfortable for paying customers. He didn't ask what was stated. He didn't care. He warned her, "You're not a good fit here anymore. I'll need your name tag and apron." Lyra stood there for a while, shocked. She then put the apron over her head, turned it in, and left. No work, no plan, but also no shame. She had never talked to her father before, and it didn't matter who heard it. What mattered was that she had finally been heard. Lyra had left that eatery 5 days ago. For 5 days, she walked about the apartment, looked at job advertisements, and tried not to feel like she had made a mistake. But whenever she started to doubt, she looked at her father's ring on the counter. It reminded her that she hadn't just left a job, she had taken on something bigger. Then, on the 6th morning, a letter came. It wasn't in a normal envelope, no stamp, there is no return address, just her name, typed in the same clear font again. She opened it gingerly, thinking there would be more puzzles. There was a thick, heavy white card within. At the top, there was a name she didn't know. Rowland and Chambers Memorial Group. In black pen below it, "You are invited to a special ceremony to remember. In memory of Elijah L. Daniels. 10 a.m. on Saturday. Cemetery on the hillside. Plot 47 inches, Section B." Lyra looked at it. 5 years ago, her father was buried at a public cemetery in Montgomery, Alabama. There was no remembrance ceremony or family reunion. A calm moment by the cemetery, a plastic chair, and a preacher who got his name wrong. So what was this? She phoned the graveyard. The woman who replied said it was true. There was a private reservation for that date and time. Paid in full, no name. Lyra's stomach churned. There was something going on, and the people who did it had money, effect, strength. She couldn't put her finger on it, but her hands shook as she put the invitation back in the envelope. She packed a little overnight bag, put on her best dress, a simple navy blue one that her father always thought made her look like she ran the room, and got on the first bus out. The trip was long and calm. She looked out the window at the curving roads and trees that were moving by. Her thoughts were louder than the engine. What was she going into? Who would be there? The sky was cloudy and the wind smelled like damp stone on Saturday morning. Her heart was pounding against her ribs as she walked into the graveyard. Then she noticed them. 10 guys. Everyone is in suits. Everyone was standing in a queue by her father's grave. They knelt without saying a word, like a wave that folds up in stillness. Lyra's breath stopped. They were aware. Everyone knew. And at that point, she was no longer hidden. Lyra remained still, watching 10 men kneel before her father's grave like it was holy ground. The wind whispered through the trees. They didn't say a word, not at first. Then, slowly, one man got up. He moved closer and ran his fingers over the edge of the headstone, as if it were the surface of something precious. It was a smart, black, and costly suit. But what caught Lyra's eye was his face. It was the same man she had seen in the restaurant, the man wearing the white suit. He looked different today, though. He looked humbled. He said, "I'm James Rowland," in a calm but quiet voice. Rowland Industries CEO. The name hit her like a cold slap. He was more than just a billionaire. He was the rich guy, the one that is on the covers of magazines, the person who people said couldn't be touched. And there he was, standing in the dirt and staring at her like she was the one in charge. "I was 12, he said, still looking at the cemetery. "We were going to church. The freeway turned our van over. Smoke, yells. I remember that my shoes melted into the floor mat. After that, your father," he gulped heavily. "He broke the windows. Took us out one at a time. He burned his arms while doing it. I was the last kid left. I couldn't get out. The fire was all over. I couldn't breathe." Lyra's fists were tight and her heart was racing. James said. He didn't stop. Even when the flames were only a few inches from his face. He lifted that door off me as if he were a superhero. He pulled me out and threw me into the grass, and walked back inside to get the driver. A long break. He didn't make it out the second time. The other men stood with their heads down. James turned to Lyra, his voice breaking. That day, your father saved 10 lives. 10, mine included. And no one ever knew since he was a black man living in Mississippi. No press, no follow-up, no medal. Just a closed case, and a line in the paper. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small thing. A button. A silver flame with Elijah's initials on it. James remarked. We came today to kneel because standing didn't feel good enough. Lyra felt tears coming, not just because she was sad, but also because it was so heavy. The truth, the quiet, the years that prejudice took away. Her dad had died a hero, and for the first time, the whole globe had come to say so. James Rowland moved to the side, and the other men stood behind him. Some were elderly now, with gray hair and canes in their hands. Some of them were still young, but their eyes showed the weight of recollection. They all had stories to tell. Elijah Daniels made this life possible. They all walked up to the grave one at a time. Some knelt down again, while others put their hands on the stone softly. A few words were murmured that Lyra couldn't hear, and their cheeks were tense with emotion. Then one of them, David Pierce, who is now a federal judge, went to Lyra. I was 11, he said. I still have the scar on my ankle. He picked me up and carried me like I was nothing. I don't even recall how he got me out, just hearing him say, "You're going to be okay, son." He stopped. I always remembered that voice. Another man came forward. I was out cold when he found me. He gave me back a life that I hadn't even begun to live. Lyra could hardly breathe. These men were powerful, respected, and had won awards, but they had a debt they could never pay off. And what about her dad? He had been buried discreetly, and only she remembered him. Up until now. James coughed. After that day, we never talked about it in public again. Someone told us not to. They whispered, "Don't make it a race thing." And there was a silent strain. "Don't stir the pot." He seemed embarrassed. And we did what they said. We moved on with our lives, feeling both guilty and thankful. But as I got older and built my business and my name, I kept thinking about him, of how unfair it was that his story died with him. He looked at Lyra. That's it for today. He took out a folder and gave it to her. There was a foundation certificate inside, the Elijah Daniels Memorial Fund. A $10 million donation started a scholarship program for young black students who want to work in public service. Lyra's hands shook as she clutched it. James said, "That's not all. You now own honorary shares in Rowland Industries. Not as a gift, as a way to show respect. Your dad didn't only save our lives. He made them. We owe him our prosperity. This is part of giving it back." Lyra gazed at the stone, and then at the folder. She had imagined that her father's life ended in silence for so long. But there it was, his voice, finally heard, resonating through the things he left behind. Lyra stayed in the cemetery by herself long after the others had left. She had the scholarship paperwork in her lap, but she was looking at the headstone. The smooth granite didn't look cold anymore. It glimmered softly in the dimming light, as if it had absorbed the words of the men who eventually told the truth. For years, she had walked around with her father's name like it was something she had to protect, a badge that no one could see and no one wanted to question about. But now the world knew. Not simply who Elijah Daniels was, but also what he had done, and what had been taken away from him. She thought of all the other stories, like his black men and women who gave their lives but were never written about in the news, carved into monuments, or spoken about. She had witnessed how history changed for those with names like hers. Quietly erasing. Grinning at unfairness. Not today. Something had been taken back today, and Lyra wasn't finished. The next morning, she went to a community facility near her home with the folder James had given her, and asked to talk to the youth coordinator. She didn't say she was a waitress or someone wanting for a handout. Instead, she said she was the daughter of a hero, and the first person to symbolize a scholarship that would help girls like her change their future. The story had spread in a week. The news in the area picked it up. Then the whole country. "Unsung hero's daughter reclaims his legacy and gives it to the next generation," was the headline. People began to get in touch. Moms, teachers, counselors at colleges. They told stories, shared memories, and said thank you. But Lyra didn't stop there. She worked with a civil rights legal team to get her father's name added to the National Heroes Registry, which is a list of brave individuals, It has never had someone like Elijah in it before. It would now. 1 month later, Lyra stood in front of hundreds of people on stage and got a framed plaque for her father. The cameras flashed, and her voice shook only once, when she whispered his name. Elijah Daniels. She stared up at the sky like he was watching her. Maybe he was. I used to think you had to wait for justice, she remarked. Now I know that sometimes you have to walk right into silence and say your father's name loud enough to break it. Months went by, yet the effects stayed. The first 10 scholarships from the Elijah Daniels Memorial Fund went to students who reminded Lyra of herself. Smart, not well known, and quietly full of potential. Kids who had been warned to sit down, remain quiet, and stay in their lane. Not anymore. Lyra became a guest speaker at several colleges and universities. She talked about more than just education and legacy. She also talked about dignity and how it isn't something someone gives you, but something you keep even when no one else sees it. She still had her father's ring, not as jewels, but as protection, as truth. She never said the scholarship, the media exposure, or even the company shares when someone asked her what improved her life. She said, "A question on a napkin." That was how it all started. 6 words, someone you don't know having a recollection. A time when the unseen became clear. Lyra never went back to waitressing, but she didn't look down on people who did. Instead, she developed a mentorship program for young Black women who wanted to work in the service sector. She taught them about money, self-worth, and how to get around systems that are meant to keep them tiny. She always closed her speeches with the same narrative, the one where 10 strong men in suits knelt down in front of her father's grave. Not because I feel sorry for you, not because of guilt, because of respect. Because respect doesn't always come right away, but it does matter when it comes to the truth. And that might be the actual legacy. Not the headlines, business shares, or scholarships. But this is the truth. Every life has hidden worth value that doesn't need permission to exist and doesn't go away just because the world forgets to look. This story is for you if you've ever felt that no one could see you. This is for your parent if they had to work 3 jobs just to make ends meet. This is for you if you've ever been ignored, talked over, or told you don't belong. Because who sees you doesn't matter. In any case, it's based on who you choose to be. Thank you for being with us today on Hidden Worth. Don't stop here if this Black story made you feel something, motivated you, or reminded you of someone you love. Tell others about it. Let someone know. And if you haven't already, sign up. Because stories like this need to be told. And you do too.